Ladies and gentlemen, welcome wrestling fans worldwide to Knoxville and the Great Smoky Mountains for the Ron Fuller, Tennessee Studcast.
6 feet 9 inches tall, 265 pounds.
This historic podcast from one of the most respected and successful wrestlers and promoters will follow the footsteps of the largest and oldest wrestling family on the planet.
Listen to what I'm saying. That's right. Bring that camera in here a little bit closer.
Through 93 years and 4 generations.
The stud has arrived.
Old school or new fan, this unique broadcast will educate and captivate as Ron details decades of professional wrestling's growth with truly unforgettable stories.
I want those people out there at home to hear the stud.
Sit back and enjoy the ride with the Tennessee Stud.
The Tennessee Stud. You will learn that name. You will remember it.
And now,
the stud is here.
Hey everybody, welcome in. It's David Summers hosting another Studcast with the Tennessee Stud Ron Fuller. It's the story of wrestling in America as told by the stud, whose family started the profession 100 years ago. Now let's step back into the ring and back into time. And there ain't no hoss like the Tennessee Stud. Ron Fuller, what's going on in the Great Smoky Mountains, Ron?
Geez, man, it's a beautiful day. Got a little blue sky up here today. Temperatures beginning to drop a little bit. We're feeling like fall. It's even starting to look a little bit like fall. Things are a little different than they were here, man, 20 years ago, and I guess that's what's going on in the world with the climate.
Yeah.
Used to middle of October was the height of the season for leaves in the Smoky Mountains.
Yeah.
And we're just now getting started. So, it's changing. The climate obviously is having some effect. I assume that's part of it, but it's beautiful, and it's just going to get fantastic here in the next few weeks. Just absolutely awesome.
That's wonderful. All right, so do you get out much lately? What you been doing?
Yeah. I've been hitting some spots. I like to get up. I was up on Klingman's Dome a few days back, 7,000 feet up, highest mountain in the Smokies. Looking into North Carolina, you could see. I think I could see Charleston, man.
Oh wow! Could you see Russia by chance?
Well, I had to go up another few thousand feet.
Well, maybe so. Okay. All right. Hey.
I felt like I could see the Atlantic Ocean almost.
Yeah, there you go.
So, I'm going out. I'm taking advantage of a little bit of the extra time that I have and getting out and seeing some of these beautiful sights. Wow, it's just an amazingly beautiful part of the country.
And a great time to be there. And listen, the last Studcast, number 221, was a really great one, an all-time record one about Southeastern's 2 world title matches on that card of October 7th of 1977. Your description of all that, the setup, the TV, the incredible finish, and the shock of 6,000 fans in that sold-out Coliseum really made it worth it. Your presentation was just like being there. I really enjoyed the setup for the match with you and, of course, the legendary Harley Race. It was another great example of what your Studcasts have really become. Pure wrestling history delivered in a story-like fashion from one of America's greatest wrestling historians. That's you, Stud.
Oh, wow. Whoa, Dave. That's a pretty big opening statement, man, for a Studcast. Gosh, it's easy, man. I had a wonderful story to tell, man, about fantastic wrestlers and tremendous fans. And it was during one of wrestling's and the territory's greatest periods. Wow, it's not hard to tell that story. Wow, it's fun. It's actually fun to have that type of history, to be able to lay out there for fans all over the world who are hungry for it. They love it. And it was a pleasure for me, that last episode 221.
That's awesome. Okay, so it's really a lot more than that, Ron. We're going to continue these historical Studcasts with the following week's great card. But first, I can't wait for fans to hear about what's happening and what you have in mind for your Southeastern Rewind YouTube channel. It's really grown significantly since its inception, but now it sounds like you're ready to leave the runway and really fly with it. So tell our listeners what's coming next on Southeastern Rewind. Already some changes there, but what's going on?
Well, I'm very excited about this, Dave, because I'm learning, like everything else you get into. You start changing things, and you're learning how to improve things. So starting this week, Dave, on my Southeastern Rewind YouTube channel, we're going to be upgrading a lot of the programming here, man. There's going to be no more of those original Studcasts that we've been on there, and you and I have been doing the Tell Me Mores about. Those are all going to be gone. They're going to stay on there, obviously, but we're not going to continue with the original Studcast. Instead, we're going to replace those old original ones with the ones we are doing right now. We're going to go to putting the new Studcast on there. And that process has already begun. Actually, the Studcast number 221, which was the great one that we just finished with 2 world titles at stake, October 7th, 1977. Number 21, it's the first. It's up there now. It just went up, and it's going to stay there, obviously. And every new Studcast from 221 forward, everyone going to be available in Southeastern Rewind. They're going to be on Wednesdays, just like you can pick them up at all our normal podcast outlets.
Yeah, you
can now pick it up right here on on my YouTube Southeastern Rewind channel.
Hey, that's big news. And listen, as you know, we're on 32 plus platforms for the audio version of this Studcast, but now you've got the video version of it, which is going to have a banner, and it's really the photo of each show that will represent that particular episode on YouTube. So a really big deal there. It also gives fans more options to get their Studcast. So I think that's pretty cool. And I know that's what you were hoping for.
That's what I was hoping for. Give them more options. And, and so they're going to be looking at 221, man. They're going to see that great photo of Nelson Royal all bent up backwards, man, on top of
what did you
Tony Charles, that just has the most awesome looking wrestling hold maybe ever.
Torture. What was it? What did you call it? The torture rack?
The torture rack.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. And that's exactly what it was, man. And so that's going to be what you're going to be seeing when you look at Studcast number 221. You're going to see that photo of the torture rack there, man. And so, we're recording now. The one we're doing right now, 222. It's going to be on the YouTube channel today, obviously. You're listening to it now. You can watch this on YouTube, or you can go over to YouTube and hear the same program.
Yeah.
So going forward, man, fans can now continue to get their Studcast not only on their favorite outlet, but they can get it on a new one. They can get it here on Wednesdays on Southeastern Rewind.
Cool. And I know you got a lot of other stuff happening. What's going on, like Continental Championship Wrestling? What's up with that?
Oh yeah, we got a lot of great stuff going on. The USA TV shows from 1988, they're already been a huge success, and they're getting more popular every week because it was a new company on the first one. There was a lot of bugs in the program, things to make it better, and talent has improved. The programming has improved. Every episode gets a lot more viewers, and it's released every Sunday. Every Sunday in the afternoon, a new USA TV show comes out. And now we're going to start with another one, of my wrestling TV company's shows. And this one is a much bigger and better show than USA. I'm talking about Continental Championship Wrestling is now going to be coming to YouTube, Southeastern Rewind. And it became one of the biggest wrestling companies in the world back in the day. And it was shot live from the famous Boutwell Auditorium in Birmingham, Alabama. Had thousands of fans in every one of those TV shows. It also had one of the most famous TV commentators in the world doing the show, the great Gordon Soley, on this one.
Yeah.
Southie, and he's not only on USA, but he is also on the fantastic Continental Championship Wrestling shows. And it featured the beautiful set, man, on this giant stage in that big historic building in Birmingham.
Yeah.
And it had featured a state-of-the-art 5-camera production. It was, like I said, thousands of fans out there in the seats, and it had some of the greatest wrestlers in the world on those shows. So Continental Championship Wrestling, CCW, is it's got to have its very first TV show, CCW #1, on Southeastern Rewind this Thursday. If you're listening to it today, we're talking about Thursday, October 28th.
Yeah.
Because they're going to be listening to these shows for years and years. But the first one is on Thursday, October 28th, and then every Thursday after that, we're going to release another Continental Championship Wrestling TV. And just like we promised, they're all going to be in the exact order they were recorded in.
That's pretty cool. Really amazing, Ron. But that's not all. You're being called one of America's best storytellers. So I love this next one. Tell us about what else new that you have in store.
Well, some fans, Dave, they want to hear short deals, what I call videos and audio clips of about 5 to 10 minutes, short segments that tell remarkable stories in them that make fans laugh, sometimes make them cry, but always entertain them. And this is going to happen a couple of times a week on Southeastern Rewind. These are all going to be called stud snips. Instead of stud shorts, it could be called stud snips. And some of them are going to come from events like the recent Dinner with the Stud, Dr. Tom Pritchard and Les Thatcher stories that come from that Dinner with the Stud. And they're going to be cut right out of these longer shows so that fans can go on there and watch just a 5 to 7, 8 minute little short thing. And I think they're going to really enjoy them, man.
That's really not going to be the only place these stud snips are going to come from, though, right?
Oh, yeah, that's for sure. I mean, some stud snips are going to be my own stories, man. Like telling a short story. It's like a very short Brutus, And I got so many stories in my head and from my crazy family and from the sports history and from traveling all over the world. My favorite wrestlers are, and who in my opinion was or is one of the greatest of all time. So every Saturday, starting this week, a new stud snip is going to be there for fans around the world. They're either going to come from Dinner with a Stud, or they're going to come from one of these segments that I want to do about just wrestlers that I have wrestled in my life, their history, and what it was like to be in the ring with certain stars.
Oh, my God, you got a ton of things to choose from all the Studcast, from the Dinner with the Stud, from all the things that you've done up to now. And to me, that's real wrestling entertainment. Every Sunday, let's see if I got this right. Every Sunday, new USA TV shows. Every Tuesday and Saturday, new stud snips. Every Wednesday, a new Studcast like the one we're doing right now. And every Thursday, a new Continental Wrestling TV show. The Southeastern Rewind YouTube channel is really going to be taking off, Stud. And I think that's what you're looking for. Once they come in, they'll see what's on there. But then every day or almost every day, new stuff is getting added.
Yeah. And it goes back to Dave thanking my fans, and that's what my YouTube channel is, in my opinion. It's just another way to give back to my fans. And speaking of taking off, Dave, I think it's time, man. Let's ride on into today's Studcast, man. Let's take off on this one because I think we got another great one today.
Well, I can tell you, Mr. Pickles and I are ready. So where are you and Lightning going to lead us today?
Well, our today's training, man, is going to take us into the Booker's world. And we go there quite a bit because there's not much more important figure in wrestling than the Booker. And we're going to ask kind of the question today of what do you do after these huge cards like the one we talked about in the last Studcast with 2 world championship matches? How do you keep the fans' attention after those matches are gone and that event is gone? How do you maintain that extremely important momentum that's necessary to operate a successful wrestling company. And how do you continue that momentum past these big events? So then we're going to be moving on in this one later on to the card of Friday, October 14th, 1977. We're going to be following a double world title card and a historic 2 straight weeks NWA lights out matches. And that's going to have sent one of the huge Southeastern stars packing, man. And the TV we'll talk about that promoted this October 14th card, the results of that card. We're going to talk about the attendance of that card. And then we're going to have a learning tree again today, man. It's about time, I think. And we have 3 questions from 3 different fans about the last Studcast.
Yeah.
Last Studcast was a record breaker, like you said. And wow, I got all types of different questions. So all these 3 questions are great ones. And I'm going to make up as best I can for missing a couple of learning tree questions, because our shows have been so good and so long that couldn't get to our learning trees lately.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I trust you on that or not, Stud. You've pushed us back 2 or 3 weeks in a row.
I hate to think, Dave, I might have to do it to you again, but
yeah. I'm not.
We're going to try to get through this one today and get that learning tree in too.
I'm not going to let that happen. So it sounds like another big one for real. So let's hear how the Bookers maintained momentum after huge events like this, because it was absolutely big. And how do you follow it up?
Well, obviously it wasn't easy, Dave. This last event, when you got 2 world title matches, 4 title matches in all on the card, plus a loser leaves NWA lights out match, wow, it's pretty hard to follow something like that. And there was probably the most difficult night to follow since I had been with Southeastern Wrestling and started that company. I realized it. So the finishes from that double world title card were critical in keeping Southeastern's momentum. Tony Charles had all but beaten Nelson Roy when the time ran out, and Tony looked like a world champion during his match, and that was an absolute necessity because it had to happen to maintain his fans and to maintain the company's momentum as well. You got a great star like Tony Charles, you can't afford for him to look bad. And he didn't look bad. So when the match ended and the crowd was going wild, Royal was in one of the most intricate, beautiful, and rarely seen finishes ever done, man. That torture rack was just an horrible deal for him in the last minute of that match. I don't know how he did it. I don't know how he survived it. He was a really tough guy, and he wanted to keep his belt that he had been champion for 9 years. He was a tremendous wrestler. And I had also not lost any of my appeal during the great finish that I had that night. Harley was clearly beat. He was in my Fuller leg lock, man. And I lost by a totally different type of disqualification, a crazy type of disqualification. One basically is based on the fact that when I had him in my toe hold, I couldn't see where he was in the ring. And I could not tell that he had his hands on the ropes. Mm-hmm. And it was so loud in the building with the roar of the crowd because they knew I was going to be the new world champion that I couldn't hear the referee was even counting me out to disqualify me. Mm-hmm. So, and so I guess this all goes back to, a lot of bookers never took the time to create these great finishes in these world title matches that didn't end up hurting their star. They always had their star wrestling the world champion. And if the finish wasn't really good, then their star didn't look good. And that was a bad deal for a territory for the future. And it wasn't easy to create a great finish, to come up with a great finish. And, bookers that weren't getting it done, that was the reason the most territories couldn't maintain that momentum after these huge cards like this one. So another thing happened that night, man, that helped maintain the momentum of Southeastern at this point. And that was the NWA Lights Out Loser Leave match that had to go on last. So after these 2 world championship matches, you had another match. Normally, the last match, mine and Harley's, would have been the end of the night. It would kind of left the people a little flat, because they didn't see me win the championship. But having this extra match, and because it was a lights out match, and it had to be the last match of the night, and the finish, and this one was a pretty darn good one too, and didn't make fans happy, that was for sure, but it did much more than that, something very much more important than that. It left that building on fire with the heat directly on two heels, man. And it was an absolute necessity for something to happen that night that left some of the heels hotter than ever. So for bookers, heat on the heels always meant big crowds. You didn't put heat on your heels, you weren't going to fill your building. And in that last match of the night, two relatively new heels got tremendous heat. And by relatively new, Don Carson was only in his third match back in Southeastern on this night. And he'd been out for totally a year because he'd lost to Loser Leave Town. He'd been gone for a year. He's back 3 nights. He's going to get this burning heat on him. The Assassin had only been in one match in almost 2 years, and he went coming back. So in one match, the last match of the night, both of these guys had to use that hidden entrance into the heels dressing room to survive the crowd, man. And the heat beating Bob Armstrong. Wow. Yeah. It was tough. It was hot, man. It was like, wow, they're going to get killed. So suddenly, we come out of this big event with two of the hottest heels in the territory, man. And they've only been seen to combine 4 times in 3 weeks. I mean, so wow, in 3 weeks' time, we've got two absolutely on fire heels. And that was the secret, man, to this whole question here. Mm-hmm. How do you maintain that momentum after these huge championship nights? These two were well on their way, man, toward the main events. And at the same time, when you think about it, we still had the Stomper. We still had Gorgeous George Jr. Mm-hmm. We still had Mr. Knoxville and Ronnie Garvin, Bob Orton Jr., the Pro. All these heels are still hot as well. So, I mean, we come out of it strong. Not just barely surviving it and dropping crowd dramatically, but coming out of it as a success rather than a big downer.
For real. And heels as big as they come, and a bunch of them. That's pretty awesome. So that's a pretty cool explanation, Ron. You managed to follow a huge card with angles that kept Southeastern on fire. So where do we ride to now? What's up next?
Well, we're going to ride into the card of Friday night, October the 14th, 1977. It's after this big double world event. And this card is a great card in itself. We return to the Coliseum again, and it's with a triple main event. And the first match on this card could have been a main event just about anywhere in the world, man. The former World Junior Heavyweight Champion, the European version of the World Junior Heavyweight Champion, Irish Pat Barrett, was facing off against Superstar Bill Dundee. First match of the night. When you open a night that way, you got a pretty good card. Second match was Tony Charles wrestling against the Pro, Doug Gilbert. And in a special event, the international star making his first ever Coliseum appearance, Thunderbolt Patterson, a new babyface, was going to wrestle the Assassin. In the first main event of that night, a special challenge match, Don Carson against his old nemesis that ran Carson out of town, Robert Fuller.
Okay.
Wow, yeah. It's a good card. And in the next one, the Southeastern Tag Championship match, is no disqualification. The champions, Mr. Knoxville, who was Ronnie Garvin under a mask, and Bob Orton Jr., managed by Al Costello, they were wrestling against the same guys they wrestled the week before in the big championship night, Joe Leduc and Roy Lee Welch. And then the main event was a Southeastern Championship match. I wrestled the Mongolian Stomper, managed by Gorgeous George Jr.
Okay, so I think the next thing up will be the TV show of Saturday, October 8th, 1977, the day after that huge double world title card. Am I correct, sir?
You certainly are, man. You win the prize.
All right,
know?
did. Thank you.
And and it was a great TV, man. This TV too was great because it had so many new things on it. So one thing it had on this TV that was really, really fantastic, it had no less than 4 matches that had been recorded the night before on that big world championship card. Now you're going to see a building that's totally packed. You're going to hear pops in that building. If you're a fan sitting at home and you're watching this TV show and you see these matches and hear those crowds, you're going to go buy a ticket. That's what it amounted to. It sold itself. This TV sold itself. So none of which in this on all these TV were more important than that NWA Lights Out last match on the card, Lose or Leave Town, with Bob Armstrong and Don Carson. So Les opens with the card of the day, and when the camera's backed away, he talked about what all's going to be on. There's new faces on it, the whole deal. And when the camera's backed away, the giant still shot there behind him on the set was the assassin in street clothes, holding up a very bloody Don Carson in the ring. What it's like the fans must have thought that weren't there. What the heck is he doing in there with his street clothes on? And then, there's Carson. He had his hand in the air and he was standing over the top of Bob Armstrong, who was laying out unconscious because he'd actually been headbutted twice by the assassin. So he had a good reason that he was laying there. And then when the cameras backed away, they captured a heavily taped up Don Carson because he'd had the hell beat out of him the night before by Bob Armstrong. And he's sitting there with his now close friend, the assassin. And Les is there with him, obviously. And the studio crowd, they erupted in boos, man. Just like the Coliseum crowd had erupted in boos the night before when they tried to leave the ring after beating Bob Armstrong. And Carson started out obviously bragging, as usual, about that still shot and how he had dominated Bob Armstrong throughout the entire match. Well, those that were there and saw the match knew that Bob Armstrong darn near killed Don Carson in that match, took his glove off, did everything he could do to him, but that was Carson's way. People didn't know if they didn't go. So Les was ready for it, obviously, though. So he asked for the video to be backed up. And it clearly showed the assassin. At this point, he was already in the ring with his mask on. Obviously, he had his clothes on. But it left out the part where the assassin had sat in the ringside seat that night without a mask on because nobody knew what he looked like. He'd never been unmasked. And then at the end of the match with Carson, and Carson has lost his glove, and Bob has beat the heck out of him, and he's as bloody as he can be. He decides to come to the ring. And it's exactly what the video showed. It didn't show him coming to the ring, but it showed him in the ring with his mask on because he put the mask on when he got up on the apron of the ring. And then afterward, it showed probably the most important part. It showed that near riot, man, that occurred after the win and after the two of them left the ring. They had to be escorted by an entire troop of policemen. And and then they both began to brag about fans, fans having to say goodbye to Bob Armstrong. Wow, they were really, they were pushing that heat, man.
Mm-hmm.
And, that was that he was just the first one to be gone in Southeastern. And that they were there now, they were going to change Southeastern wrestling forever. And that they made some strange comment to Les about they'd already made a deal with the devil, and soon fans are going to know what that means.
Okay.
Right. And knowing Carson and a guy like the assassin, it's like, whoa, wow, what is this all about? So, that little comment got Les, man. He was shocked. You could see it. And he started right into it. What are you talking about? What does that mean? And they just got up laughing. And the assassin went to the ring. He was in the first match, and Carson went with him, followed him out there to the ring. So the assassin, he destroyed his opponent in the first match. And he could have easily pinned him, man, during the match. But on the end, he threw him out of the ring to Don Carson, who's standing out there on the floor. And then the assassin drew the referee's attention, got him looking the other direction, and Carson loaded his glove, and he knocked the assassin's opponent out. Well, look, he was already about out. Now he's totally out. And he was out so bad that I think the plan was for Carson to throw him back in. But Carson couldn't get him up. He was flat out. So the assassin had to come out of the ring. And the two of them threw this unconscious wrestler back into the ring. And then the assassin went back in the ring. And he stood over his opponent. And he pinned him by putting one foot on his chest. And the ref counted him out. So they returned to the set with Les. Rob, my brother, was in Studio B with a guy that was making his first ever appearance in the state of Tennessee, one of the great black wrestling stars of all time, Thunderbolt Patterson. So here's a brand new guy, man. So these four wrestling stars were set to meet each other in single matches the following Friday night. Robert and Thunderbolt had been friends for many years at this point, and Patterson was a uniquely fantastic talker and interviewer, and so were the other three guys that were there, and two in this interview. And in that next 2 minutes, fans were treated to an interview that wasn't going to be heard anyplace else in the world, probably, from four guys, man. I mean, it was just really a tremendous interview. And it would be Thunderbolt's very different style in the ring that was going to get him over. He had this crazy way of misshaping his body. I mean, he would knock a guy down, and then he would do all these funky deals with his body where it looked like he had a deformities, you know. And he just did it when he wanted to.
Wow.
But then on his comebacks, this guy had tremendous fire, man, when he made his comebacks. So obviously his style made him stand out from other wrestlers. He was going to be an overnight sensation in Southeastern and the perfect replacement for Bob Armstrong.
All right, so I've been wondering since the last Studcast, how do you treat this Bob Armstrong situation? I mean, you can't replace Bob Armstrong.
Yeah, yeah, right. Well, that's a good point, you know. But actually, you know, Dave, I had another replacement as well, besides Thunderbolt, and he was in the next TV match.
Oh,
and, he'd wowed fans 2 weeks earlier, right before appearing in the Southeastern One Night Tournament to see who was going to get to wrestle Harley Race. He was the recognized former world junior heavyweight champion from Europe, Irish Pat Barrett.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right.
So, you know, I doubled two guys that make it to replace him. So Tony Charles came to the set with Les, and he was real good buddies with Pat Barrett for most of his life. And he wanted to join Les and talk about his buddy who was wrestling in the ring. And this combination of Tony Charles with his British accent and his Irish friends' fantastic wrestling moves in the ring, it gave this match, man, an international flavor. It wasn't just a regular match. It's two foreign guys with foreign styles. Wow, it's amazing. So Pat joined them. After his win, he went to the set, and he and Tony interviewed with the Pro and Bill Dundee, their opponents in Studio B. And really, Dave, I couldn't have been more proud of Southeastern's talent with the accents and the ability of these three guys, as an example, from three different countries on the same wrestling show. So right there was representatives from England, from Ireland, and Australia. And if that didn't make Southeastern have an international wrestling television show, I mean, there's probably no place in the world that day that had a combination like that on the wrestling show. Nowhere. And if you added to that group the Stomper, Ronnie Garvin, and Joe Leduc, all of those from Canada, it was 4 different countries represented in that television show.
Wow, that's really cool, Stud. So I would have never thought about it that way, or even really thought about it. So, all right, hey, I'll tell you what, let's take our break here, and let's come back with the personality profile. And while we take the break, you've got time to head over to Southeastern Rewind on YouTube. Subscribe, ring the bell to get reminders on when the greatest stories in wrestling will show up on Southeastern Rewind. You ring our bell, we'll ring your bell when they get ready. And be sure to tell your friends about Southeastern Rewind. Again, the personality profile is up next right here on this Studcast. Hey, Stud fans, David Summers. And we know it's only October, but this Christmas might be a lot different than most. With supply lines and empty shelves, you may want to shop early for your friends and family. The Stud Store is always open 24/7 and now stocking up with T-shirts at $23.99 to $25.99. Tennessee Stud Mask, $40. All photos, $15. And Ron's Red Hot book, Brutus, $19.99 and $29.99 autographed. All shipping is free. Every one of these is now available at tnstud.com. Click Stud Store. Another great gift idea is the November 24th, 2021 2-hour Dinner with the Stud at Calhoun's on the River Restaurant in Knoxville, Tennessee. It's only $30 and includes a free buffet dinner. 2 8x10 photos of Ron and special guest Jimmy Golden. A live 1-hour Studcast and 1-hour question and answer show. Great door prizes and much more. Get it all at tnstud.com. That's tnstud.com. Click Stud Store. Start shopping today and put a smile on that stud fan's face this Christmas. All right, welcome back once again. Another Studcast with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller. It's David Summers. All right, Ron, personality profile time. Set it up for us. Who was on it that day?
Well, man, it was a most unusual profile, man. And simply because so much had happened the night before. And we took advantage of it. I took advantage of it the best I could. So, there was 2 different people on this profile. It was basically a fan's dream, man. It's going to have highlights from 2 world championship matches. They're going to be highly edited, and they're going to show just the best parts of the match, and they're going to show the ending of each of the matches. So it was one of the reasons our TV show was one of the best in the world. It took 2 men in the control room and the director of the show almost an hour to cut the 1 hour and 45 minutes of tape from those 2 matches, from those 2 world title matches the night before, to cut them into 2 3-minute videos from each match. So May of 1975 until October of 1979, I couldn't have asked for a better TV situation or a TV with more cooperation than that WBIR Channel 10 TV in Knoxville, Tennessee. They were just phenomenal, and with them, the effort that they went to make us successful was just fantastic.
Okay, so they worked an hour to give your fans like 6 minutes of video. That's incredible.
Yeah, that's, and it was 6 minutes of 2 world championship matches that were so good that it was so good that when I sat there and I watched it with the fans, because I hadn't seen it yet either, these videos, I could understand, man, what's going to happen here, and that fans are going to talk about it for months. Every time I went out of my house after that week, for months, that's all people wanted to talk about was, damn, that world championship, that personality profile when you were talking about Harley Race and Tony Charles was talking about Nelson Royal. And I'm sure they did the same thing for Tony Charles every time he went out of the house too. It was one of the reasons professional wrestling was one of the most watched TV shows in that part of the world. It was things like this, man, that made Southeastern different from any other TV wrestling show anywhere. So Tony and Les, they went first on this profile. And they took a total of 4 minutes. And then I came in and added another 4 minutes after that. So that total of 8 minutes and a segment of the show that was designed for basically 5 minutes, it surely made wrestling fans out of people that never were before. and the people that never thought they would ever be fans of wrestling. And those that were already fans that watched this, they became forever fans. I mean,
Yeah.
that 8 minutes was just, it was phenomenal, man. It
Hmm.
was what it was all about as the owner of a company. So Roy Lee Welch and Joe Leduc, man, they just set the studio on fire. Just as soon as the personality profile ended, they hit the studio, and wow, they were over, man. The fans loved this team. They got a quick win, and Joe ended up with his bear hug, and Roy with his abdominal stretch. Fans loved him. I couldn't figure out exactly why they loved him, man, but I never could deny it either. I mean, I couldn't figure it, but I sure couldn't say that it wasn't happening. So they went to the set afterward, and Les queued up the last of 4 videos in this one TV from the night before. And this one was the Southeastern Tag Championship match. It had Joe Leduc and Roy Lee Welch against Mr. Knoxville, Ronnie Garvin, and the Mask, and Bob Orton Jr. And Joe and Roy, they talked over the video. And at the end of it, Leduc had his bear hug on Ronnie Garvin, and Roy had his abdominal stretch on Orton. Kind of like what had just happened in the TV match just seconds before. And the referee was between the two guys asking for submission from either one of the two champions. He was in the perfect position to get the submission. And all of a sudden, the manager, Al Costello, he just stepped up very calmly on the apron, and he just got in the ring. And the referee's attention went from looking at the two guys that they expect to get submissions from, to the guy that's in the ring for no reason. And and the referee saw him, and he hesitated. He didn't want to disqualify Costello's team because, by golly, they were going to lose. They were going to get beat. So Costello was no dummy. He saw that, hey, one of these guys is going to give up.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he made a charge at Roy. He figured, well, I got to hit somebody. I got to do something worse to get him disqualified. And when he made the charge at Roy, the ref signaled for the bell automatically to stop the match. But Roy saw him coming, and Roy released the hold, and Costello accidentally hit Bob Orton Jr. by mistake.
Oh, no.
Right at the end of the match, and so the disqualified champions, they rolled out of the ring. Leduc and Roy got their hands raised by the referee, but they couldn't win the belt because the team had been disqualified. But out on the outside of the ring, Orton was starting to shove old Al Costello, and I'm calling him old Al because Al had some age on him. He was shoving Costello around a little bit because he couldn't figure out why'd you hit me. And Mr. Knoxville, Ronnie Garvin, he kind of got between them, and he calmed them down, and that was the end of that. So Joe and Roy, they stayed at the set with Les, and Mr. Knoxville, Bob Orton Jr. and Al Costello, they went into Studio B for their interview. And this rivalry was just beginning, man. This is going to become a great tag rivalry between these two teams. And the last match of the show was the newly crowned Southeastern champion, Mongolian Stomper, won it the night before. He was managed by Gorgeous George Jr. And the belt had been held up on the previous Tuesday before this Friday night, the big card in Johnson City, Tennessee, in a match between Ricky Gibson and the Stomper. And, they met then for the title, Ricky Gibson against the Stomper the night before in that big championship card. And, Stomper won the match, obviously. And, Stomper was as proud as a peacock, man, wearing the belt. He loved to strut around with those belts on. And Gigi was just as happy that, they had those belts. And they both always all they wanted to be was champions, man. If they weren't champions, they were down and distraught. And Stomper, he did what made him famous in this match. He's in the ring now for his match on TV, and he stomped the brains out of two young wrestlers, man, like he always did. And wow, he just demolished them. And then I went to the set, and Stomper and Gigi went into Studio B, and we're ready for the last interview. And there was already enough bad blood between us to not have to make up history for a feud had been going on basically for a long time between me and him. And I sat and thought about it a little bit. And, I think we at this point had probably wrestled each other more than 100 times. This is in 1977. He'd come in 1976.
Wow.
A lot of matches with the same guy.
Wow. Do you build a relationship from that as friendship down the line, whether it was while you were still together wrestling or maybe later in years, later in life, in retirement, or did you build a relationship with Archie?
Well, I think more a friendship than a relationship. I mean, you have to respect.
Right, I was going to say, that's the key word.
You build that respect
Yeah.
for one another, and
Yeah.
that turns into a friendship, because
Yeah.
you admire the guy, and and that's a good point. That happened to a lot of wrestlers that wrestled in all these tremendous number of matches against one another. So
So when you would run into him, even years down the line, it kind of was unspoken. You walked up and you shook hands, and probably didn't have to say anything because that mutual respect was just there.
Yeah, and then toward the end, on into the late 80s, there might have been an occasional hug.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
I mean, it was almost more than respect. Because you spend 15 years with a guy, and you've been in the ring with him that 100 times turns into 300 matches. And it's just it's a strange feeling between two wrestlers. It's an odd sensation. I'm sure it's that way in a whole lot of sports.
You kind of had
football players that play each other a lot. Basketball, all different sports. You build a tremendous respect for some of them.
And especially in wrestling, you kind of had his life and he kind of had your life in the balance in the ring because somebody could get seriously hurt. And you've been there before, too. So, listen, that's a great TV right there, Ron. So, a ton of new stars, historic videos of 2 world title matches, and kind of a new beginning for Southeastern. So, what happens the following Friday night?
Well, in that great first match I was talking to you about, Irish Pat Barrett, man, he beat Bill Dundee. What a phenomenal match. Wow. Lots of different throws, lots of different moves. Wow. I mean, it's just, I love to watch him. I wouldn't miss that match because Barrett was a renowned wrestler. And so was Dundee, and I'd wrestled Dundee many, many times. I'd never wrestled against Barrett, but I talk about respect. I gained a lot of respect in that one match for Pat Barrett and his ability. Tony Charles in the second match of that night beat the pro, Doug Gilbert. Thunderbolt Patterson and the Assassin had an absolutely phenomenal 20-minute time limit draw. Patterson, there again, just like the respect I got for Barrett, I got the same feeling about Patterson's match. And those two guys wanted it. They were two baby faces just getting there, knew they were competing against each other as well as everybody else. And wow, they both went out and they shined, man. They lit it up. Robert and Don Carson, they had a fantastic match. They always had good matches. Mm-hmm. At the end of this match, the Assassin ended up going down to the ring, and I happened to be watching the match from the back of the building, and I had to go down too. They both got on Rob, and so I went down too, but they got out of the ring before I ever got in. And the referee disqualified Carson, and he and the Assassin, like I said, they took a powder before I ever got there. So I raised my brother's hand, man, to a big round of applause, and we went back to the dressing room. Southeastern Tag Championship match, that was a no DQ, and it got stopped because both teams left the ring. And they didn't just get out of the ring. They left the ring, and they fought back to the big black curtain at the back of the Coliseum. That didn't very rarely happen. Obviously, they got counted out. The match was ruled a no contest. They never came back. they fought. They actually passed the curtains and into where nobody could see them fighting, and it was still going on. So, and Joe Leduc kind of squared off, and he stayed with Mr. Knoxville, and Roy kind of fought basically with Bob Orton Jr. So the last match on that card was the Southeastern Championship, and it was kind of a wild one too. Right on the beginning of the match, Ricky Gibson had wrestled Stomper the week before, so Ricky, he wasn't even booked on this card, and but he came obviously to the matches anyway, and he came down to ringside before the match even started. He got me out of the ring, and he asked me if I would let him be my manager. And he'd had a pretty nasty loss to the Stomper the Friday before, the night before actually, and he had some interference from Gigi that actually cost him the win, and I thanked him for coming down, but I declined his offer, because I felt like I probably could handle myself here, but as usual, I was probably wrong about it because Gigi got involved in the end of my match, right, and. So when he did, they both got me bleeding a little bit, and then the referee, he had to disqualify him. He had no choice. So Ricky Gibson came to my rescue, and then because he was not wrestling that night, he wasn't in the back of the building where they might have been looking for somebody to come and save me. He came from the front of the building where he was sitting up in the crowd with some people.
In street clothes.
Yeah, and in street clothes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Yeah,
he wasn't dressed to wrestle, yeah. And Stomper and Gigi, boy, they didn't know he was coming. They weren't looking for him. And he climbed up on the top rope behind the Stomper's back, and they were putting the boots to me. And he drop kicked that Stomper off the back rope in the back, and that Stomper went flying 3 rows out in the ringside, it looked like, man. And then Gibson went to work on old Gigi. And that crowd went nuts. Gibson was like a madman, and so I got my hand raised by disqualification. Couldn't win the title. Stomper was still a champion. But Ricky Gibson had made his mark that night, and he's going to be returning the next Friday night. He'll be on the next Friday night's card.
All right, so it had to be a really good night attendance-wise. What'd you guys do?
Well, we did about 5,400. Now, we were at 6,100, I think. We were about 700 fans down. But, wow, that's not very big drop considering that you had that huge card.
2 world titles. Yeah, 2 world titles the week before.
2 world titles, 4 championship matches, a loser leave town, lights out. I mean, you had everything. So what it basically told me is we'd managed to keep our momentum, man. My booking had done the trick. We didn't take a dramatic jump. We were still pretty well over for 5,000.
Wow, that's pretty cool. All right, so I'm glad to say, Ron, guess what? We have time for the learning tree. You're not getting away with it this week. We've missed it a couple of weeks. I mean, because you obviously had some pretty good stories to tell. But we've got 3 questions, and they're all 3 from the last great Studcast about the 2 world titles, as a matter of fact. The first one comes from Craig Brinkley. He says, just listen to the Studcast. Definitely a classic one. He's referring to 221, number 221, now on Southeastern Rewind. How was Harley's payday this time? And listen, I remember the last time you wrestled Harley and you had the private moment and you guys were in the locker room afterwards. Everybody was basically gone from the building. And I remember that private moment where you paid Harley off. So I'm wondering if it's going to be something like that.
Yeah, well, oddly enough, it did end up the same way, because we wrestled next to last. That last match was not the 40-minute match or a long match. It wasn't like the 1 hour that had happened in the Tony Charles match that night. And mine and Harley's was past 45 probably. So, we had time to take our time, and we took a shower, and Harley waited because he knew he was going to get paid in cash, and I like to pay in cash.
Mm-hmm.
So he waited till last, and then we end up in the same dressing room. I went to his dressing room again, and it was just slightly less than that April card. Now, we had wrestled in April, 6 months earlier, basically in the same year of 1977. We wrestled, and that card had set the all-time record crowd for a sports event in the Coliseum. It's still the record 44 years later. And Carly got paid $2,000 on that night.
Yeah.
And I remember, telling the story and watching his face and him saying, Ron, I'm going to call Sam Mutchie and tell him I want to work Knoxville as many times as he can book me here. And, And he kept his word. He started coming more than he ever had. I got the world champion more than I'd ever gotten him while Harley was champion. And so on this night, he didn't get to 2,000, but he was pretty close. He got $1,800. And part of that was because there was a second world championship on this card.
Mm-hmm.
And, I had more than one world champion to pay. I had two to pay. So, and that $1,800, I was looking that up, man, Googling it, and you know what the value of that is in today's money?
What's it like today?
That's $8,000.
Oh,
today's money.
Yeah. Okay.
So we had $8,000 night.
All right. So, but after all that, and listen, I know he's been in the business a long, long time. I'm sure he understood, but was there any indication one way or another? Was he thrilled with that? Was he like, yeah, about that? What was it like?
Oh, no. He was happy. Harley had been around a long time. He was not just a wrestler, but he had done some booking.
Mm-hmm.
He'd been around the owners of company, and he knew what business was all about.
Mm-hmm.
And I could tell that he took it very well, because I think he realized, that, hey, I'm not the only world champion on this card.
Yeah.
And then he looked around in that dressing room at some of the best wrestlers in the world.
Yeah.
And he thought, wow, it's a pretty good payoff. And it was, by anybody's standards, a big payoff. I don't care where it was you were wrestling.
Yeah.
An $1,800 night in 1977, you were getting paid big time.
And when you were dealing with a superstar like Harley Race, to me, that's the big deal of the whole thing. And he's a gentleman all the way through. Yes. He is a truly world champion, not just when he goes in the ring. He's a world champion everywhere he goes. He even sent you guys the promo, the leading up to it from Hawaii. So he was engaged the entire time for this match to help you build it up and really sell it. So, wow. Yes. Yeah. All right. So that's cool. I love hearing the stories about Harley Race. So, all right. So Mark Frazier asked, leading up to the big match, like the one with Harley, a possibly 60-minute one, how did you prepare? Another good question. Gosh, Mark, I was wrestling every night, and a heck of a lot of my matches during those days was 30, 45 minutes. That was not uncommon. So when you're wrestling 6, 7 times a week and you're averaging 30, 40 minutes a match, I was in great shape. Anybody that wrestled that often and that long was going to be in great shape. And on days like that championship night, where it might last an hour, I had a little different routine. I ate early in the afternoon, but just to make sure that I wasn't going to be in there and have a full stomach and end up getting sick or nauseous or feeling like I couldn't breathe. So I always ate early on world championship matches, and I always took a nap after that meal. Pretty good nap after that meal. So other than that routine,
I was prepared to go to the limit, man. No matter what it was, no matter what that limit was, I was prepared for it, and I was in shape for it.
The nap was probably a good idea because after you have a good meal, you don't go swimming for 30 minutes, Stud.
Yeah, so. and you don't go in the ring either.
Yeah, probably very similar. Okay, Ron Stevenson asked, were there moves wrestlers didn't like used on them? Some moves look painful regardless if it is a work or not. The human body isn't meant to bend in certain ways.
Mr. Stevenson, that's pretty cool. You're right about that, and obviously I'm going to tell you, man, I had so many comments about that photo of Tony Charles and Nelson Royal. That question here obviously came from somebody who saw that picture, man, of that torture rack that Tony Charles put on Nelson Royal. Not once, but twice. Put it on him on TV and put it on him again in the actual match. And I guess the quick answer to your question, Mr. Stevenson, is were there moves that wrestlers didn't like? The quick answer is yes. There were moves in wrestling, that the wrestlers really didn't like to get put into, man. And obviously that torture rack, it was not a hole you look forward to being put into. I mean, if there was discussion about it, you were like, wow, I'm hoping this ain't going to last long. I hope you ain't going to leave me there for a while. And in the case of Tony Charles and Nelson Royal's match, I think it was very close to 1 minute that he was in that move.
Wow.
And I don't know how, man. I don't know how he made it. If somebody had told me you got to do this for a minute, I would have said, I don't know if I can do it, man.
Wow.
So and obviously, you didn't want to get put into a torture rack type of hole. So you're right, Mr. Stevenson. The human body doesn't bend well in certain directions.
Was there one that you didn't like that was used on you?
Yeah. I got one in my mind that comes instantly to me, and it happens to be about the same guy we just talked about here, Harley Race, and is a great example of not wanting to do a particular move, or be involved with a particular move. And the first time I ever wrestled Harley Race was in Miami, Florida, in about 1973. I don't remember the exact dates. I'm thinking it's probably 73. Harley was not the world champion, but he was about to. He was headed there.
Yeah.
And in that match, on the end of it, he climbed the top rope. He suplexed me twice in the middle of the ring. He climbed the top rope, and then he dived off head first into the side of my head.
Oh, good God.
From the top rope. Like a torpedo, he put his arms down by his side.
Yeah.
And he did not catch himself with arms, body of any kind, and drove the side of his head into the side of mine. And,
it's like a log dropping off.
Yeah. And what the crazy part about it is somehow I actually turned my head a little bit to see where he was when he was coming down off the top rope.
Oh.
And I saw that his head was going to connect with mine.
Oh.
And I was like, oh, you kidding me? Wow. There's a lot safer ways to make a living, I can tell you, than
wow. That. Okay, was it because you turned your head, or because and how much of a real headbutt was that coming from Harley coming off the top rope?
Well, it every time he did it to me a couple of other times.
Yeah. I was going to ask about that too. Yeah.
And he didn't, the first one hurt me worse than any of them, but there was no way you could do that move without connecting.
Well, yeah. And I was going to say the dread had to be bigger on the second and the third one, because in the first one, you didn't know what to expect. But after that, it was like, oh God, here it comes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And,
wow.
That's a part of being a wrestler, man. And like I said, there was a whole lot of safer ways to make a living something in the ring.
Dude, that's just to be able to tell the story of wrestling Harley Race. That is another phenomenal Studcast, Ron. Obviously, they don't all have to be built around world title matches to be special. That's for sure. Okay, listen, on Facebook, to become friends with the Stud, simply like or follow him on either the Ron Fuller, the Tennessee Stud page, or the author Ron Fuller Welch page. On Twitter, follow him there at Ron Fuller Welch. And don't miss the next Dinner with the Stud, Wednesday, November 24th. 7 to 9 p.m. It is the night before Thanksgiving. It's a great time to visit the Smoky Mountains for a vacation and an unforgettable evening with Ron, Les Thatcher, and WCW's Bunkhouse Buck, also known as Jimmy Golden. Experience a great buffet dinner at one of the world's finest restaurants, Calhoun's on the River. It's located on the Tennessee River and right next to the University of Tennessee in downtown Knoxville. Get the free dinner, 2 free 8x10 photos of the Stud and Jimmy Golden, a 1-hour live Studcast plus 1-hour question and answer show immediately following that, great door prizes. You'll enjoy a cash bar right there in the dining room this time, and meet all 3 stars on the way in. Reservations only $30 at tnstud.com. That's tnstud.com. You click on the Stud Store. Look for the Dinner with the Stud sign right there at tnstud.com under the Stud Store. The photos alone, that's a $30 value. The last one was absolutely fantastic, almost full. Man, I wish I could have been there. Reserve your seat now for this tremendous evening. When you see it, by the way, on Southeastern Rewind, you'll understand why it's best to get your tickets ahead of time. It was a great crowd, and you'll be ready for Thanksgiving, and you'll be off to a great start. Hey, by the way, Brutus, Ron's highly acclaimed novel, is still breaking records. It takes place not far from where the Dinner with the Stud is going to be, where his notorious lion, Brutus, escaped into the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. They call it the next Jaws. Get it on Amazon, Brutus novel, or the extremely valuable autographed copy from his website at tnstud.com. Click on Stud Store. Stud Store. I'm running out of gas here, Stud. Only $29.99. That price includes shipping. All right. Did I miss anything?
No, I think you did really great here, man.
All right.
I would like to say, though, on the very end, man, before we close out here today, I'm hoping fans remember the Southeastern Wrestling, the YouTube channel, man, and all the new things that are on there now. A new USA TV show comes out every Sunday. I'm going to do these brand new stud snips and stud stories basically every Tuesday and Saturday. Your latest Studcast is now on there every Wednesday, as well as all the other outlets where you can get them normally. And don't forget, beginning this week, every Thursday, the first classic Continental TV show from the famous Boutwell Auditorium in Birmingham, Alabama, is going to be the first one, and it's going to start on this Thursday. And it's going to be added to everything else on there. And wow, I want to send a special thanks out to everyone for all their support, especially on the YouTube channel, for everybody that has subscribed. For those that have subscribed, thank you, obviously. And if you haven't already, please do. Tell your friends about what's happening on that YouTube channel, that I'm trying to preserve the wonderful old school wrestling of yesterday. I want fans to be able to see what it was all about in wrestling's golden era.
All right, that's pretty cool. So where are we going to ride next week, Stud?
Well, in addition to today's training, we're going to educate again, man. In next week's today's training, we're going to take a deep dive into something I just mentioned, into how wrestling was all handled and what was done and what made it happen back in the golden era, man, the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, when it was on fire. Also next week, we're going to have a big Southeastern event, late October 1977. This is a time when new wrestlers are arriving, kind of like they came in today. There's going to be more coming. from all over the world. And the card, we'll talk about the specific card of October 21st, 1977. We'll talk about the TV that promotes that card. We'll talk about the results of the card and the attendance of the card. And we'll end up next week, hopefully, with another learning tree. Man, and I got a good one here, I think, that I've already looked at. I saw where somebody had asked me a question about what's happening in my search for a second territory. And, I kind of got away from that, but, I think that's one I'm going to answer next week because it's still in the process and it's getting a lot closer than it used to be. So, I want to thank everybody for listening today, Dave, as always, and all the other times as well. And please take care of yourselves and others, and may God bless us all.
Another great time for Ron Fuller in the great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee. I'm David Summers saying thank you for listening. Find me at davidsummersproductions@gmail.com. This Studcast is a David Summers production for Tennessee Stud, LLC.
Thanks for joining us today for this historic Studcast. The true story continues next week. So full Nelson your friends and point them in our direction for another ride with the Tennessee Stud.
1, 2, 3.
This is David Summers saying so long from the great Smoky Mountains.